you want
Right.
to?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Unfortunately, I also wasn't here yesterday. I would have loved to come, but I had to go to Brussels to discuss the first draft of the European Report on Development that we're preparing for the European Commission and a number of member states from the EU. And we discovered that we're still friends, but we're even better friends if we have double the detail in half the length. So we're still working. we're still working on this.
I know the feeling.
We hope to publish it soon with a range of briefings and so on. By the way, the European Report on Development is being developed and written by a team of researchers from the Overseas Development Institute, from the ECDPM, a think tank in the Netherlands, the German Development Institute in Germany, the University of Athens, and also the Southern Voice, which is a sort of a network of southern think tanks. Sort of our starting point is that is actually we don't say very much on the Sustainable Development Goals themselves because that we didn't want to second guess, and we started our work a year ago, and we didn't actually say, well, this is what the SDGs are going to be like. What we did note was that they are likely to be ambitious and that they require a lot of work, and they're very ambitious, so that's good. But we need to understand also how can we achieve these sort of an ambitious, transformative agenda. And then we note that there's sort of quite some problems in the world in terms of finance and other means of implementation, sort of the other side of the coin as well. So finance is, for example, there's lots of finance, but it's not necessarily flowing to the right places. Domestic resources as percent of GDP is flat for a whole range of countries. Aid might not prioritize the right types of countries. And it's not just finance, but also on the sort of implementation frameworks, the policy frameworks at both domestic and international levels. There's a lot to that is not right. And therefore, we need to sort of think, our team, but also more generally, we needed to think more about sort of how can we think about these challenges in a slightly different way, because it hasn't worked in the past. And we've come up with we're working with a particular framework, and using that framework, we come up with a number of implications. But we note in terms of the framework that that it's important to move from an old type of framework towards a slightly newer type of framework in thinking about financing for development. The old type of framework, and particularly the implementation that followed the Monterrey Consensus in 2002, was very much about sort of, well, here's a financing gap. We need to achieve something. For instance, we want to reduce poverty. We can do that by increasing primary school enrollment rates, and there's a financing gap attached to it. Therefore, that needs finance, and that finance needs to come from aid. It's a stylistic sort of presentation of how much of the implementation of the Monterrey framework has gone, even though the Monterrey framework itself was broader. And sort of our team suggests that we need to think about these problems slightly differently. So on the top, it's not just poverty reduction, it's sustainable development transformation. That is an important goal, and these are economic, social, and environmental goals in a balanced way. And it's not just that we can sort of buy progress very easily. It works through a range of enablers. So you need to think about enablers of long-term change, and these enablers are governance or institutions, resources, physical capital, human capital, natural capital, technology, and networks. Previously, we were thinking, particularly in terms of the implementation of the Monterrey Consensus, mostly on aid. Now, of course, we think about the range of flows that we've discussed and you have discussed in the conference: public, private, domestic, and international. And so we need to be thinking about how can financial flows help to put in place the enablers for long-term change, And it's not a one-to-one relationship, and that's where I think the heart of the report goes in. It's basically the context matters and policies matter a lot. And here we'll think about some examples, and I think that's very important to realize. And I hope that the Others Conference can at least provide signals that finance isn't working in isolation of its context, and that the context matters a great lot, and that we can have more discussions on that. For example, policies and good policy frameworks can lead finance. So finance can actually follow good policy frameworks. We have an example in the case of Mauritius where 20, 30 years ago they were thinking about a strategic direction of the economy. They had a particular policy framework in place to think this through, and the finance, both public and private, followed that. So there was a sort of a confidence in the policy frameworks, and so it's not that finance leads, but it follows policy. So that's already one link. There's another link. Just a slight change in regulation can unleash much finance. We've talked. You can talk about land titles, but one example we came across when we did our work for the European Report on Development was in Tanzania, where there's quite a lot of interest, and we had a workshop, quite a lot of interest from the private sector to invest, for example, in wind farms. And there's a lot of project preparation had been done. The public sector had helped there a little bit. But the investment didn't take place, and it didn't take place because there were some energy regulations that weren't the right ones, and it had to do with selling the electricity back to the grid. And if you then look at the energy system in Tanzania, then it's very different from, say, Kenya and Indonesia. Kenya and Indonesia actually have a lot of penetration of renewable energy, whereas Tanzania hadn't. And it was particularly due to this sort of particular financial or this particular energy regulation. There are lots of other examples. For example, if you think about infrastructure, there's this infrastructure financing gap that some would say is $1 trillion or more, but it's half that if you're more efficient in implementation of infrastructure projects. So there's a link between better capacity and actually fewer finance needs. And all of these issues, they also link back to, so it's not just the domestic level, but also the international level. Better international policies can get unproductive financial assets into more productive assets. So at the moment, there are a lot of financial fund flows are going after financial instruments, or financial flows are parked somewhere in a tax haven and may not be used productively. You can try and change some of that through different types of taxation rules, maybe better implementation of transfer pricing, for example, so that you then get more tax revenues and revenues in the countries that produce goods, and you probably get fewer funds parked in tax havens. And you can use that money, of course, if the policy framework is right, you can use that effectively. And I can go on and on and on. Trade rules. I mean, you mentioned trade rules. It by itself can help. And thank goodness that today the US and India agreed to do more on trade facilitation, and that probably the G20 is likely now to put in its communique that we are going to go forward on trade facilitation. Trade facilitation, it's a no-brainer to economists, really. It benefits all countries. We are an agreement on trade facilitation. It's just strange that it hasn't happened yet, and it benefits all countries. Okay, so that was basically on just to show that policies matter. They matter for a range of things. They reduce the need for finance, they make finance more effective, and so on. So we hope that that's something that can play a role at others in a discussion leading up to others, but also in implementation. So we need to think about monitoring, how that can be monitored, and the linkage between policies and finance. And now we go to the next slide, and that's sort of the final slide. I haven't got my pointer. Maybe you could. So we had 6 country illustrations to support the European reporting development, and also we had 6 workshops. And we asked in that workshop, which was back in June, we asked them, the participants, what would you like to see in a post-2015 financing for development framework? And much of the attention was focused on energy, sort of energy transformation in that workshop. But there were issues discussed about aid, so aid can still be important. Long-term concessional and predictable finance for infrastructure, for example, was highlighted as an issue. Other areas as well. But there was a lot of discussion on beyond aid. So other types of flows that are important, and we had this discussion on the private sector interest in wind farms, for example. But what was also striking was that most participants wanted to have issues discussed related to governance and policies and reform of, for example, the TANESCO, so the energy regulator, that is combining regulation, distribution and production, and maybe split it. Other issues that were mentioned, like PPPs. So there's a whole range beyond aid and beyond finance that these participants thought was very important. So let me conclude. I think the much is it's a hugely ambitious agenda that's out there. Much is currently wrong, but there is also something that can be done about it. So there are policies that can work to make things better. And so if we have that discussion on the link between finance and policies, I think that will be extremely helpful in the run-up to others. And let's hope that we can think about these discussions will follow others as well, and that we think about some indicators. I've got a range of other examples that we can come back to later.